Boruto winced as the first whispers of consciousness came back to him. He felt uncomfortably warm and stiff. His eyes fluttered open, only to close as the harsh glare of sunlight burned his pupils. Rolling out of the sun, his eyes opened again. He was in a room, small and barren, with wooden crates stacked to the ceiling. A single window, barely larger than Boruto's head, was behind him. The source of the sunlight. Boruto flailed as he tried to stand, only to fail. His arms were tied securely behind his back, and his feet were bound together. Memories of what happened came flooding back. The two mercenaries, the middle-aged men knocking him out, the Byakugan. Despite the situation, he couldn't help but feel elated. He hated it, but it always made him feel jealous whenever Himawari stayed behind for extra lessons with their grandfather, because she had awakened the Byakugan. For a while after she had awakened her own eyes, Boruto thought that maybe, just maybe, his would awaken too. They never did. He always left those lessons bitter and angry, resenting his sister, and he hated to feel like that. Because he loved his sister more than anything or anyone in the world, he didn't want to feel jealous of her, and now he wasn't. He was her equal. He could stay with her and they could snicker at their grandfathers. He explained how to use their clan's eyes, and in his stiff, archaic way of speaking. Tentatively, he reached for his chakra. It felt different, as if the flow had changed, fitting him better. It flowed easier, more fluid. Boruto felt the pressure build behind his eyes. It wasn't painful, nor was it overbearing. It was just there. Boruto knew instinctively that if he channeled chakra into his eyes, the pressure would increase and his Byakugan would manifest. Boruto smiled. He had the overbearing urge to find a mirror and just stare into his new eyes. But he couldn't. He was a prisoner. No sooner did he think it, the door of the room burst open. 4 people strode in. The middle-aged man who had knocked him out last night, the 2 ninja he had fought with, and a woman with a frightening porcelain mask covering her face. The middle-aged man smiled broadly as Boruto took in his features. His skin was the color of bronze, stained from the sun, and his natural skin tone. Thick, sandy blonde hair framed his face, and a trimmed beard with stray white hairs hung from his chin in a goatee. He had piercing blue eyes that seemed to stare through Boruto, as if he knew everything about him. Everything screamed that this man was from the land of lightning, possibly former Hidden Cloud. He was dressed in forgettable fatigues, but there was one thing the man wore that stood out: his headband. There on the man's forehead was a scratched and tarnished steel band with the character for ninja etched into it. It was scratched out, a large X scarring it forever. Boruto didn't know what that meant, but it couldn't be anything good. Had he forsaken being a ninja? Had he sworn enemies with every ninja? Every hidden village? "Looks like Sleeping Beauty's finally awake," the middle-aged man boomed, his voice deep and baritone, commanding, powerful. Boruto swallowed. "You gave my boys here quite a lot of trouble, you know that?" he asked. Boruto remained still, laying indignantly on the floor. The man sighed heavily, as if holding a great burden. He nodded his head at Boruto, a quick bird-like motion. The rogue ninja he had fought that previous night, if it had been a single night, stepped forward, cracking his knuckles menacingly. He hoisted Boruto up by the collar, pinning him against the wall. "Show some respect," the rogue hissed through gritted teeth. "You stand before the great Eiji Yagami of the Lightning Armor, leader of the Crimson Tide." The rogue drew Boruto back, before slamming him into the wall again. Boruto saw stars. He was dropped unceremoniously to the ground. Boruto looked up, meeting the eyes of this man, Eiji, and stared at him defiantly. "You know," Eiji said, almost conversationally, "I've seen some shit in my life, brat. Lot of shit. Seen men cut to ribbons. Seen men turn to ash. Seen trees suck the life out of my friends. Know what else I've seen? Seen men that got their hands cut off. But boy, that doesn't sure sound awful nowadays, does it? Medical ninja can put bodies together like jigsaw puzzles. Hell, I seen a pretty pink-haired girl stick a man's heart back in his chest after a goopy white monster tore it clean out. He was right as rain in a few days." Eiji paced the room, making a very crude gesture with his hand of ripping a man's heart from his chest. "But the hands, man. The hands. Seen a lot of men get their hands cut off in my day. And yeah, them pretty little medics can stick 'em back on. But you know what? They never quite work the same. They fumble with tasks they did with ease before. They slower. Never quite as fast as before. For ninja, that's a death. Hand seals don't work. The fingers ain't agile enough to make the intricate gestures. Seen men go into the battlefield like that. Never seen him again, he said, eyeing Boruto's wrists. Boruto felt his heart hammer in his throat. He swallowed, trying to get it to go back down. I have half the mind to let Takeo here carve off your hands, Eiji said, nodding over his shoulder in the rogue ninja that Boruto had fought. Takeo grinned fairly, gripping the hilt of a kunai so hard his knuckles were white. But, Eiji drawled, turning to face the two men. Leave us, he commanded. Takeo growled, but bowed low and left the room. Only the woman with the porcelain mask remained. She stood by the door, a silent guard, her hands clasped behind her back. Through the tiny black slits of her mask, Boruto could see cold, hard green eyes boring into him. But I know a lot of things, Eiji continued on, taking a ragged piece of paper from his pocket of his fatigues. For example, I know this. I know you ain't really a hidden Eddie ninja. You ain't got that red hair, dead giveaway. Them eyes of yours too. Ain't no Uzumaki got them. No Hyuga in that island fortress of theirs. And that hair's of yours, too blonde, too bright. Only ever seen one brow with hair like that. Strong son of a bitch. Heard he bagged himself a little pretty Hyuga wife after the war. Boruto grit his teeth, almost growling at the man. No one talked about his family like that. No one. Eiji kneeled, grasping Boruto's chin painfully tight, his thumb digging into his cheeks. And them scars, man. Them scars. Only one brat you could be, he said, nodding his head in agreement with himself. The bastard son of the Hokage. Eiji held out the piece of paper in his hand, showing a crude drawing of Boruto. My boys found this here flyer in the Land of Fire. Says here you worth about 1 million Ryo to the Hokage. Alive, he said. So here's what I'm thinking. I call Takeo back in here. I have him lop off your hands at the wrist for stealing from me. Then I send you back to your daddy in a crate and collect my 1 million Ryo. The flyer said alive, not unharmed. Sound like a plan? Boruto felt every muscle in his body tense. He was sure that more adrenaline was in his veins than blood, as his heart hammered in his chest painfully. His eyes were sore with pressure, his Byakugan making its presence ever known. No? Ichi asked, a wicked grin on his lips. He hummed and thought. I'm a merciful man, brat. Real kind, you know. Can forgive a lot of things. I don't want to see a little shit like you be crippled. So how about this? I forgive you for stealing from me. You keep your hands, and I don't ship you off to your daddy. In return, piercing stare. 3 years of servitude with the Crimson Tide, and at the end, you walk free. No strings attached, he promised. What do you say? Boruto's shoulders slumped and he hung his head in defeat. It wasn't really a choice. Work for the crazy whack job or be crippled and sent back home in a box. Fine, he whispered, his voice hoarse and cracked. Eiji smiled, clapping him on the back a few times. Good, good, you got a bright future with us, brat. Don't worry, it ain't all bad. I run a tight ship. Takeo's a real bastard, but he won't touch you now that you're one of us. In time, you'll think of us like a second family. Eiji boomed, laughing heartily. Boruto doubted that. The middle-aged man wrapped his arm around Boruto's neck, putting him in a chokehold without applying pressure. Boruto stiffened as his head was directed to the woman standing by the door. Meet Hikari, my lieutenant. She's your new master. She says jump, you ask how high. Don't make her job any harder than it already is. Girl has a mean temper, former hunter ninja. She can cut the balls off a fly at 50 yards with her throwing needles. Don't piss her off, he said, barking with laughter as he released Boruto. He left the room, laughing down the hallway. Boruto felt like crying. The girl, Hikari, strode over to him with quiet, lithe strides, kneeled, withdrawing a kunai from somewhere within the folds of the fatigue she wore. In a quick, practiced motion, she cut the ropes binding Boruto's hands and feet. His eyes flickered from the shadows of her green eyes under her mask to the small bob of black hair pinned behind her head, held by 2 long metal needles. He could see that the tips were not blunt and rounded, but sharp and pointy. They were throwing needles. She might have been pretty under the mask, Boruto thought, if she wasn't part of the brand of heartless brigands that had kidnapped him. Let's go, she commanded, her voice lifting and soft. Boruto rose, standing on shaky legs as he followed her out of the room that had been his prison cell. Sarada and Konohamaru wandered through the winding alleyways and dirt roads that made up the small and only town on the western edge of the Land of Water's territory. They had split into pairs to search the island for the mercenaries that had been plaguing the islanders, the so-called Crimson Tide as they liked to dub themselves. The villagers hid in their homes, shutting the windows and closing blinds as they passed. Sarada thought that was peculiar. Konohamaru seemed to pick up on it too. It was as if the villagers were afraid of being seen, or worse, afraid of seeing foreign ninja. Walking the market street, they found a dango stand and slipped inside. The owner turned to welcome them, a smile on his face, but his eyes instantly gravitated to their headbands. The smile slipped. Other customers, seeing that they were foreign ninja, quickly stood and left. They didn't even pay. Most telling of all, the owner of the shop didn't care. "We'd like the special," Konohamaru said with unease, pulling out a few ryo. The shopkeeper didn't make any eye contact with Konohamaru as he took his money, before darting into the kitchen. He returned moments later with 2 trays of skyr dumplings and shooed them out of his shop, before closing up for the day. "How rude," Sarada scathed. She and Konohamaru walked and ate, keeping an eye out for anything out of the ordinary. They hadn't seen anyone resembling mercenaries in the town so far. Up ahead, Sarada could see a few kids hassling an elderly woman who was struggling to carry a load of bagged groceries. Scowling, she threw her box at Konohamaru before angrily stepping forward. Konohamaru whispered a silent prayer for the kids. Sakura should have never taught her daughter her inhuman strength at such a young age. "Hey, you brats," Sarada roared, the kids still turning. They took one look at her, saw her headband, and bolted down a nearby alleyway. One of them ran straight into a trash can, knocking it over and flailing through the garbage. Turning back to the old woman, Sarada saw that she was quaking in fear. "Sorry about that, ma'am. Some brats have no respect for their elders," she apologized. "Here, let me help you." Sarada held out her hand to help carry some of the woman's groceries. Instead of a bag, she was handed a wad of ryu. "Please," the old woman cried. "This is all I have." Sarada shook her head. "No need for payment, ma'am. Scaring those kids was enough for me," she said, not taking the old woman's money. The old woman stared at her with wide, disbelieving eyes as she took in Sarada's features. You're not one of them, are you?" she asked. Sarada looked confused. "One of them?" she questioned. The old woman looked around frantically, down the streets, between the alleyways, into the shop windows, on the roofs. Sighing wearily, she whispered, "The Crimson, and deal with any mercenaries we found here. What can you tell me about the Crimson Tide?" The woman sobbed with visible relief. "They took over the town maybe 3 months ago. They told us we had to pay protection fees. At first, no one listened to them. Then, when people didn't pay them, they took what they wanted. Entire shops went out of business. Anyone who resisted was be within an inch of their life," she gushed, speaking rapidly. Sarada could tell she had been under heavy duress during the occupation of the town. Then they started taxing the people. Anyone who didn't pay up the tax or couldn't afford to, the old woman choked up. "I understand," Sarada said reassuringly. "Can you tell me where they are now?" The old woman looked up. I don't know. They left in the night sometime last week. There was this boy that came to the town," she said. Sarada's breath caught in her chest. "He was looking for work. I could tell he hadn't eaten in some time, but everyone was too afraid to hire him. Afraid he was a member of the Crimson Tide. A spy. They captured him, hauled him into town during the night, dragging him by his feet. They left the next night. No one has seen him since." Sarada swallowed her nerves. "Can you tell me what this boy looked like?" The old woman nodded. "Your height and age, blonde hair." "Thank you," Sarada exclaimed, dashing off. That was all she needed. It had to be Boruto. It just had to be. She found Konohamaru talking to a few teenagers that had been loitering in an alley. They had their heads hung in shame as he loomed over them, his wallet in his hand. If Sarada had to guess, they tried to pick his pocket. Bad idea. "I found Boruto," Sarada exclaimed, running up to their teacher. Konohamaru gave a stern glare at the teenagers that sent them all skittering. "Where?" he asked. She quickly informed him of what she had learned. Konohamaru nodded. "Let's go meet up with Yamato." It didn't take long to find Yamato and Mitsuki. The town was small after all. They had no luck in finding any information about the Crimson Tide or Boruto. Where would they go? Mitsuki pondered aloud. Depending on the size of their company, they could hide in any of the small islands in the Land of Water. They would be impossible to find. Yamato nodded his head. They could be hiding on any number of small islands used by pirates or smugglers. They would have hideouts all across the land of water. If they captured Boruto, however, they would need a place to contain him. That would rule out many of the smaller islands, leaving only medium to large land masses. If they go to any of the islands watched by the Hidden Mist, well no. We should search for medium-sized unmarked islands. Look for caves and atolls that could hide their base of operations, he explained, his Anbu training kicking in. There was now a search and rescue. Anbu lived for these missions. Sharing nods of agreement, the four quickly set off, heading north. An arcing chain of islands spanned from the furthest western borders of the Land of Water, all the way to Nadeshiko village. They all agreed that none of the islands they had seen previously were fit to hide a band of mercenaries. That left the large island to the east, watched by the Hidden Mist, or the island chain to the north. They chose the north. They didn't even stop to let Yamato make a ship out of wood. They simply channeled chakra into their feet and ran. As Sarada ran, her eyes bled red, one tomo in each iris, her Sharingan looking for any trace of her missing friend and his captors. The first island was little more than a bar of sand that pierced the waves at a low tide. The next was an atoll, a ring of coral reefs that had no visible landmass. The one after that was a small island that Sarada could walk the length of in 15 paces. They chose to rest there, recovering their chakra. I'm going to send a wood clone to the Hokage, Yamato declared, weaving several hand seals. His flesh seemed to bubble as a wooden copy of himself tore its way from Yamato's shoulder. Sarada could only describe it as unnerving. The wood clone took off, sprinting west towards the Land of Fire's shores. They searched for the rest of the day, and well into the dusk. By the time Konohamaru forced Sarada to rest for the night, they discovered and searched no less than 15 islands, and covered over 50 nautical miles. They found no trace of Boruto, or the Crimson Tide. Himawari's eyes darted from the large cake in front of her to the doorway that led into their dining room. Any minute now, she was sure her brother walked through, an arrogant smile on his face as he waved off his family's worries. He never came. Staring into the 13 flickering candles, she wiped away the unshed tears gathering in her eyes. Her brother wasn't coming home. Hinata lurked nervously in the kitchen, watching her daughter wait for her son. She couldn't help but imagine what Boruto was doing right now. It was his birthday, his first one away from home. She wasn't ready to let him go, not so young. Hinata watched as Himawari stiffened and leaned forward. She blew out the candles with a strangled sob. Hinata could make out the barest whisper of a wish. I wish brother would come home, she said. Hinata felt her heart break for her youngest. Himawari leaned forward, pursing her lips and blowing gently on the candles. The wick smoked as the fire was extinguished. It was just as the candles died that Naruto came home for the evening, exhausted from what he called a hard labor, otherwise known as paperwork to normal people. Himawari looked up, expecting her dad to be as tired as he always was on the rare occasions he came home from work. He wasn't. He wore a wide, infectious grin that made her mood evaporate instantly. He just had that effect on people. He didn't appear to be wearing his Hokage cloak or hat, which was a strange sight for Himawari. Her father almost never parted from the ceremonial garb of the village leader. Instead, he had a large scroll, taller and wider than she herself was, wrapped in a strap of leather that he wore around his chest. Himawari dropped from her chair and padded over to her father. What is that, Dad? She asked, a hint of excitement coloring her voice as she circled Naruto, examining a large scroll. Naruto laughed, kneeling at eye level with his daughter. I told you I'd show you a few tricks. This way, when Boruto gets back, he'll be jealous of you and never dare leave his sister's side again. Himawari was bouncing up and down in excitement. This, Naruto declared, flinging the scroll out of its leather bag with a dramatic flair, is the summoning contract for the Great Toad to Mount Miyaboku. My master taught this to me when I was just a little older than you are now. Naruto unfurled the scroll as Himawari scampered back into her chair, this time standing on it so she could see. Her eyes danced over the scroll. The scroll was partitioned vertically, each box having a person's name written inside. At the bottom, a large handprint sealed the contract. There's my name, Naruto said, pointing to the most recent name. Your grandfather, he added, pointing to his father's name. And my master, Jiraiya, he finished, his voice cracking slightly as he said the name of his deceased master. And, Naruto continued on, his moment passed. Here, you can sign your name, he said, unrolling the scroll a little bit more, revealing an empty box. If you want, that is, he added hastily. Himawari was bouncing up and down, nodding furiously in excitement. Naruto could see the veins in her forehead pulsing, a sign that her Byakugan was manifesting. He chuckled under his breath. "Since it's a summoning contract, you sign it in blood," he instructed, pulling out a kunai. Himawari snatched it from his hands, and ever so gently poked her index finger. She scribbled her name and then rubbed her palms together, pressing one to the paper beneath her name. There was an almost imperceptible flash of chakra as the contract was signed. "And now, the hand seals," Naruto said, slowly showing his daughter the seals. "Boar, dog, bird, monkey, ram. You need a little blood for each summon, but what you have in your hands now should be enough." Himawari nodded eagerly, practicing the motions of the seals. They hadn't quite covered anything this advanced in the academy yet. "Dear, perhaps you should go outside," Hinata suggested nervously, suddenly remembering the size at which Naruto's toads could be. Their house was big, but not that big. Naruto laughed, scratching the back of her head. "Don't worry, I'm sure she won't summon anything that big. I only summoned a newt on my first try," he assured her. Hinata didn't look convinced. Himawari flashed her hand seals with a fervor. "Summoning jutsu!" she screamed, slamming the palm of her hand on the wooden floor, putting as much chakra into the technique as she could muster. Naruto regretted not following his wife's advice instantly. A torrential cloud of white smoke erupted from where her palm struck the ground. The sound of wood splintering and breaking echoed through the house. When the smoke cleared, a large toad with hide the color of cherry blossoms sat in Hinata's dining room, its head nearly touching the ceiling. The wooden floors beneath the toad had shattered into splinters under its weight, and the dining table was now in roughly 4 pieces. Naruto choked on his laughter as he felt, more than saw, Hinata glare at him. "You forget our children are more talented than when we were at our age, dear," she said with false calmness. "Hey, who summoned me?" a distinctively feminine voice called out. "I did," Himawari squealed. She was seated upon the toad's head, her legs dangling over the sides. "Well, get down here and let me take a look at you, brat," the toad declared impatiently, her bulbous eyes rolling in their sockets as she tried to spy her summoner. Himawari jumped off the toad, landing nimbly on her feet. She stared up at her son with wide eyes, practically bursting with energy and excitement. Himawari quite liked her toad. She was a pleasant color, not the ugly greens, reds, and browns that her father's were. She looked strong, too. 2 horns erupted from her skull, just above her eye sockets. They were long and sharp, good for poking her brother, Himawari decided. Bulbous, orange-colored eyes with oblong black pupils studied her with the same intensity that she studied the toad. Himawari quite liked them. They reminded her of sunsets. "So, this is one of your brats, Lord Naruto," the toad said. "Lord Fukasaku warned us it was only a matter of time." At this, the toad sighed. Naruto just laughed. Hey, Himawari cried, jumping up and down in an attempt to catch the toad's attention. "What's your name?" "Gamami," the toad said with a heavy sigh. Himawari smiled brightly. "I'm Himawari Uzumaki," she introduced herself. "Just don't summon me inside someplace so small next time," Gamami complained, being careful to not let her horns puncture the ceiling or break the light fixture. Himawari nodded in agreement, and then the toad disappeared in a flash of smoke, returning to Mount Miyaboku. "Naruto," Hinata said, grabbing her husband's attention. "I expect this to be fixed in the morning," she said, with a cheerful smile that she obviously didn't mean.